I hope and trust that those of you who chose to celebrate or get together in some way over the past holiday season and participate in one of the festivals of light that occur in December in this part of the world found some joy and comfort in doing so. And those of you who chose not to participate in the festivities found ways of rest and relaxation as well. I don't know what it is about holidays that makes me start thinking about leftovers. Maybe it's the large meals that we plan and prepare and cook together that seem to always have leftovers that remain afterwards. I suppose sometimes one can see that as a curse, but yes, it is a blessing too. At the end of the Christmas dinner this year that I spent with my family and parents, even with just 6 of us together, we said at the end, wow, we've got a lot of leftovers. Some ham to put in the fridge, some cranberries and rolls and scalloped potatoes. We could use those tomorrow. There was still enough food for another meal. I'm sure many of you experienced that. I've heard people talk about the leftovers sometimes more fondly than the original meal. I have such fond memories of waking up the day after Christmas. Growing up in Canada, we called it Boxing Day. You know, that was a day where, though exhausted from visiting the whole day before, we would sleep in a number of extra hours. We'd completely miss breakfast, but we'd get up for lunch. And those lunches are so memorable to me, even though they simply consisted of dragging everything out from the day before, putting it out on the table, and all of us just foraging for the best parts. At that time in my life, I would head for the stuffing and then cover that with gravy, and quite enjoyed that part of my Boxing Day. It's with amazement that I reflect on these events and recall that those leftovers often tasted better than the exact same food did the day before. Wonder why that was. Was it that the flavors and the food had a chance to get together, mingle and dance, and get to know each other better in the refrigerator overnight to somehow enhance their flavor the next day? Possibly. It could be that food simply tastes better on a day where there is not so much pressure to get it exactly right. You know, sometimes those holidays can bring with them such huge expectations and all those extra tasks in the day. When we rush around through the day, and we sometimes forget just to take time to savor the tastes that are part of it. The day after, with simple leftovers, allows a time to relax, and maybe that's why the food tasted better for me. And yet there are also times when leftovers are not always that appetizing. Wasn't long ago that when I was single and lived alone, I remember often being confronted by leftovers. Maybe it was my planning that was a little off and creating too much, or maybe I shouldn't have been shopping at Costco. You know, those portion sizes are incredibly large there at that particular store. I often wonder when I walk down the aisle and see that mayonnaise jar, you know, that one. Whoever gets to the bottom of that mayonnaise jar. So, you know, I would have these Costco-sized meals that I would find myself eating for breakfast and lunch and supper, and then do it out again the next day, and still they were there, and I don't know, at that point they did lose a little luster. I can recall getting to the point of thinking, oh, I don't want to eat that dish again. So maybe you have had the experience of having a fridge full of leftovers and having really nothing at all that appealed to you. I'm reminded of going to the fridge or the cupboard or seeing many things left over from other meals and wondering what I could possibly do with them. Maybe it would just be easier to start over again. So as I thought about leftovers through the holiday season and began to think of how I could metaphorage through that notion of leftovers, two stories came to mind. One from the gospel that's attributed to Mark, which is commonly known as the fishes and loaves story, and another that I'll share in a bit that comes from Reverend Gordon McKeeman, who was a minister in Akron, Ohio, and served as a president of Star King School for the ministry as well. I think they point the way of some ways we can examine leftovers. Reverend McKeeman will point us towards the personal spiritual journey that leftovers can suggest. And I think the Gospel of Mark, that fishes and loaves story, reminds us of sort of the political importance or the justice importance that leftovers can have today and did long ago. So the story that is in Mark that probably we've all heard, it seems that Jesus had come upon a large crowd and not wanting to let the opportunity to preach and teach go by, he engaged the crowd in what seemed like it was a day of instruction. By the end of the day, there were 5,000 people that had gathered together, and the disciples, being concerned about the health and well-being of the gathered crowd, asked Jesus if they should send out for some takeout in the surrounding villages. Maybe they could go to the grocery store and get some bread. Well, Jesus responded by asking his disciples simply to find something for the gathered people to eat that they had already had, so that they didn't have to go out, and so that they could offer the radical hospitality that they wanted to. So rather than sending the disciples out or getting taken, Jesus asked them to provide the crowd simply what they had with them. So the story seems miraculous as Jesus broke and blessed 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes, and the disciples cobbled together their and with the loaves and fishes were cobbled together, and there was enough food from that to feed 5,000. In fact, in the story, I recall that there was enough food that the leftovers filled up 9 baskets. So where is it that all that extra food came from? Unitarian religious educator Sophia Lyons-Foss wrote in her book, Jesus the Carpenter's Son, her interpretation of this biblical story. When the crowd saw only 5 loaves and fishes, she posits, those that had extra food with them began to share it with the rest of the crowd. So rather than a supernatural creation of food from nowhere, people had brought with them leftovers from their tables, and together they made a feast that could feed the entire crowd. I would suggest that that act of saving and sharing food with others is the message contained in that story. Over the years, researchers and journalists have also explored the environmental impact of leftovers. I found an article some years ago from a New Zealand newspaper that had this bold headline. It said, "How leftovers can save the world." A campaign had been started some time ago to encourage people to find ways of using their leftovers as opposed to just throwing them away. Researchers in the United Kingdom suggest that 6.7 million tons of food waste end up in our landfills every year. One only has to consider the amount of carbon inputs that we need to grow that food, the petroleum-based fertilizers that give health to the soil, the diesel fuel that it takes to transport food to market, the refrigeration required to keep that romaine lettuce healthy as it gets to our fridges. It takes a large ecological footprint to make that all happen, and research shows that food waste is a key issue in terms of reducing our ecological footprints. How might we use the food that has been grown so that it doesn't go to waste? A leader in that movement to reduce food waste commented that if we stopped the amount of food waste, that we could also, at the same time, take 1/5 of the cars off of the road. So the campaign urged people to plan meals, write and stick to shopping lists, make smaller portions, and learn to prepare and cook leftovers and food past its prime. Maybe for me, the lesson is that jar of mayonnaise is probably too big. How might we think of leftovers in the context of our part in affirming and promoting the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part? Let us also take some time this morning to do a little more metaphoricing about this concept of leftovers. There are times when we can feel ourselves a little like those leftovers at the back of the fridge, covered in yesterday's foil or sealed in the latest plastic space-saving device. Yes, we were useful and important for a little while, and somehow we now feel relegated to that corner of our lives, like the refrigerator where we feel as if we just don't matter. Reverend McKeenan reminds us in the meditation from his book, Out of the Ordinary, that if we take time to look in our metaphorical refrigerator door, we have many leftovers to examine. Here's what he writes. Sometimes I enjoy cooking. I've discovered that one of the greatest of culinary skills is making new creations out of leftovers. It takes imagination. It takes a little skill with spices, herbs, and sauces. The achievement of satisfying and palatable meal from leftovers can be a model of how one might conduct one's own life in a creative way. The first thing you need to do is open the refrigerator door. You'll see an assortment of things, containers, jars, bags, boxes, and things wrapped in foil, wax paper, or plastic. Now I invite you to open a different door, the door of your past. What you find there will be leftovers too. You'll probably find your family's voices, their admonitions, perhaps their praise, maybe their blame, their warnings, some expressions of their love, their anxiety. You may find traces of their uncertainties and problems and hopes. You will rediscover some decisions you have made without thorough understanding of the consequences, about leaving home or not leaving, about when you decided to be married or not to be, or both, and to whom. You'll probably remember some of the jobs you took, some of the jobs you wanted but didn't get, and some of the ones you thought about and turned down. You will also find some circumstances, accidents, diseases, and the times you were born into and lived through. You will find your family and some of its ways, its heritage, its customs, the habits that were funny or odd and are somehow deeply ingrained and make other ways seem even odder than your own. You will find people who touched your life in 1,000 unaccounted, unexpected ways, who were there at special moments and changed you, or made you a gift. The gift of a smooth stone, a happy day, or an unforgettable experience. And there will be all the ruins, sorrows, guilts, regrets, along with the fears and the hopes, the dreams and doubts, forgivings and forbiddings. Don't we have crowded refrigerators? Every one of us. Such a collection of leftovers. Well, welcome to the world where we all cook using leftovers. Some of us with imagination, some with creativity, some merely resenting the task, some thinking that there is no possibility in it. Add the secret ingredient, and something will come of it that will be at least edible, probably even palatable. Reverend McKeeman suggests that if we take a closer look in our refrigerators, we'll find those voices and admonition and praises and blames and all of those things that are contained in living our lives. Dig a little deeper and we may find a few long forgotten morsels hiding back there. We may well see sorrows and regrets, guilts, hopes, dreams, and doubts. Seems that each of us has our fair share of leftovers in refrigerators and cupboards of our lives. But it is those leftovers that in fact make us whole and make us holy. We couldn't make the beautiful lives that we have without them. So at times, each of us may feel a bit like some leftover relegated to the back of the fridge, or possibly have thoughts and feelings that arise that are indeed leftover from a lifetime experience. How might we wish to treat these kinds of leftovers? Maybe with a little creativity and perseverance, they will eventually become tasty and delicious new meals on another day. Or will the leftovers get relegated to the back of the fridge to be long forgotten about until eventually we may no longer be able to ignore them? I've had that experience with food in the back of my fridge. You leave it there long enough, they do kind of, that food does let you know that they're back there. Yeah. So, our life of leftovers are the very ingredients that make us the whole people that we are. Our Unitarian Universalist community should be a sacred locale where we are continually reminded of our wholeness and holiness, despite our many perceived shortcomings and leftovers. It is in honoring our relational bonds and providing loving kindness to each other that holiness emerges. When we respond to each other in ways that enhance our relationship and bonds to one another, renewed life results. Yes, we may find lurking deep at the back of our refrigerators some leftovers from our lives that we really wish were not there. But without them, we would not be who we are today. So may we each embrace those scraps that we may not care too much for, and with the help of family and friends and loving and supportive spiritual community, remember old and create new recipes that incorporate our whole selves into a new dish that is our life. Like Laura Zucker's lyrics of Sea Glass this morning remind us we can be reborn. May it be so. Blessed be and amen.